Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harari. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, The Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Okay, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Founders Dilemmas podcast. Charlie Harari here with the great Dean Wasserman. Dean, what do you have for us today?
Hey, great to be back with you, Charlie. Today we have a star of the Israeli ecosystem who also has lived on both sides of the Atlantic. And so she can, at YU, we talk about the superhighway between New York City and Israel. She is a key player on both sides of the superhighway and can bring both expertise in each, but also a comparison across them. But she's been a key collaborator of mine on several things, including creating our YU Israel Summer Internship Program and being able to have me be able to impact some of them in terms of being able to have them understand Founders Dilemmas and the goals that we have for the podcast that we're able to do also firsthand with a lot of those entrepreneurs and also on the investor side of it. So Yonit Serkin, thank you so much for taking the time and having this be the next round of our being able to collaborate on things together.
Thank you so much for having me. Dean Wasserman, whenever you call, I will definitely show up and be there because I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to work together and collaborate in that sort of way. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to using that license that you just gave me. So why don't you start off giving us a little bit of your evolution, talking to us. You ended up, and this is how we had met, and then the main thing that we collaborated in, being the head of Israel's largest startup incubator, MassChallenge-Israel. Why don't you talk about your path on the way to it, the key steps in your career before becoming the head of MassChallenge-Israel?
Sure. You talk about the highway between New York or the US and Israel. And I feel like I've been a resident or a frequent flyer or frequent traveler on that highway for virtually my entire life. My family actually made Aliyah when I was a very young child. I was about 18 months old when we first moved to Israel. My folks, of course, American and grew up in the States. And we came for 7 years. And so very much of my early identity was very much about being Israeli and having grown up here. We came back to the States and I ended up doing my undergrad and graduate work at Johns Hopkins, focusing on international relations and international finance. And I was pretty certain if we had met during that time, I would have told you that my career path was going to be to become the next Madeleine Albright. I figured that was very much in my wheelhouse and that's where I was going to go because I felt like through diplomacy and through connecting with global entities, that's where you can make a huge impact on people. Fast forward to 2001, I was a student at Johns Hopkins. I was looking for a summer internship and decided I wanted to be in New York City and decided to get an internship with this guy who was running for mayor. At the time, it seemed like he had a relatively small chance of winning, but got myself a summer internship working for Michael Bloomberg's first campaign for mayor. I was not yet 18, so I couldn't actually vote in the election, but I found myself amongst some of the most interesting and ambitious and exciting people that I could ever imagine. And so for me, that was a huge turning point because I went from sort of seeing federal politics or national politics as being the way to impact the world to starting to understand that local entities and local governments really have that same capacity. I stayed in touch with the administration after, of course, Mayor Bloomberg won the first election, stayed in touch there. And so once I finished my graduate degree in Washington at Johns Hopkins, I came back to New York and started working for the administration. Joined first in the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is one of the city entities that is that is charged with major rethinking about how the New York City economy continues to grow and attract talent and attract great people and businesses. And then moved over to the mayor's office. And in my final role there was the deputy chief for economic development. So for me, the beginning of my career, so I think those first 5 years, was a lot about how do you create platforms that allow the private sector to interact in a meaningful way, to create jobs, to drive innovation, to drive the betterment of business and our lives, those sort of improvements. In 2010, my husband and I, we have a YU connection there, but my husband and I decided that we were up for another adventure. And so we decided to come to Israel. That was going to be our adventure before we grow up and have a family and do all those things that one is supposed to do when you get to that point. And so came to Israel and really wasn't sure where I was going to fit into the economy. Obviously, I had read all the books. I knew the Startup Nation. I knew sort of the story here, but wasn't entirely sure where I'd fit in. And I have to say that my first interaction with this ecosystem was really that discovery period where I reached out to tons of folks to whom I had only the furthest connection or didn't even have a really meaningful connection, and asked to sit and to consult and to get their advice, and just found open doors in so many places and a lot of willingness to talk to a young person who was coming into the local market, and quickly found myself in VCs in the investment space, really utilizing my background, knowing the US market, knowing how large entities like governments and others were working through different processes, and being able to give that sort of perspective and feedback to the startups that were here in Israel. So spent about 5 years in 2 different VCs doing active investing in Israeli startups, until I got a call from a friend who was calling on behalf of MassChallenge. I'll admit I did not know MassChallenge when I first got that call, but I took the time to start to get to know what this entity was, and really just fell in love with the concept of a nonprofit accelerator that puts job creation and founder support in its center, and then builds around it the ecosystem that can help launch companies that will create not only meaningful solutions, but also sort of meaningful change for our economies. And I was really excited to be part of the founding team here in Israel. So we brought this concept that had been launched in Boston in 2008, brought that here to Israel, to Jerusalem specifically. And I think that that's in and of itself a pretty exciting idea to, if you will, dafka come to a city that's not people's first city of thought that comes to mind when you think about innovation here, and got to lead the team there for about 6.5 years, and continue to get involved with them today. During my time there, we had 350 different companies that came through. We got to launch really innovative programs like the internship program that we partnered with YU on, but also launched programs with different governments from Taiwan, from the UAE, really looking at how innovation can help support new growth, new ideas, better services, and really just improve lives all over the world. And that is, that's how I got there. It was, I think there are so many points along the way that could have gone differently. But I've been both fortunate and excited to be able to take on some of those.
So that temporary adventure in Israel in 2010.
Yes,
going on its 13th year.
It's gone long. Yes, 13 years later. When we came over, we said we're going to give it 3 years, because we figured 3 years was enough to give it a real effort. And 13 years later, here we are. Yes.
Okay, and even the kids playing Little League Baseball is happening
That's right.
in right
That's
now.
right. And so we have 4 kids. We live in Modi'in, and yes, my 2 older guys play baseball. And I think if you ask them on random days, they would tell you that they were from the States, even though they've never lived there. But it's really wonderful. We have a nice community here, and they get to be both Israeli and a little bit of something extra on the side also.
Okay, great. So let's get into a little bit some of the things, the ins and outs of MassChallenge-Israel.
Yeah.
Founder perspective, starter perspective on becoming part of the MassChallenge-Israel cohort. What is the process of getting into that? What are the criteria that are used? Take us inside that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is wonderful about MassChallenge is that it's very, it's first of all sector agnostic. So we get to see a lot of differentiated startups who are might be tackling very similar problems, but from different places, or utilizing similar types of technologies that sort of underpin the actual discovery, the actual product. But they're using it in different ways. So sector agnostic. MassChallenge is a nonprofit, so we don't take any equity from the startups, which I think is for early stage companies can be a real blessing, because in those really early days, we wanted to create really as few barriers and few obstacles for entrepreneurs to be able to come and get plugged in immediately to an ecosystem, to a network that has people all over the world that are sort of lined up and ready to help and to support these entrepreneurs. In order to become part of a MassChallenge cohort in any one of the locations, and there are about 5 or 6 in the States, there's of course here in Israel, there's in Europe, there's activity in Latin America, so it's really a global network. In order to get involved, there's an application period. Those applications are then read by judges who are volunteers from ecosystems, again, around the world, who give their perspective on your findings, your competitive analysis, all of your business plan going forward. So even if you never get past that stage, you will have received written feedback from experts from all over the world who can give you some ideas, some tips, some different thoughts, and some advice moving forward. The top quartile, just about, gets invited for in-person interviews, and then they're meeting again with a panel of local experts in the industry. So you might meet with investors, you'll meet with other CEOs, people who have already launched businesses. You'll meet with ecosystem stakeholders. So those could be lawyers who work with entrepreneurs. They could be people who are in the finance spaces. They could be other stakeholders, the potential clients or customers that you would have. And then so the entrepreneur will have the opportunity to pitch, to answer some questions. And then those judges will talk amongst themselves, will give their feedback, and then ultimately the MassChallenge team will synthesize that and invite the companies to be part of the cohort. What I love about this process is that I think about it as that you get mitigated against the "I had a bad day" situation, right? So oftentimes when you have an entrepreneur who's meeting an investor or who's meeting a potential partner, if that partner has a bad day, then it's one voice and you're out. And I think that this system actually encourages collaboration. It encourages a lot of group exchange of ideas, and that can ultimately help support the entrepreneur. And you get so many different perspectives. If you think about it, if you have a room where you're getting, 5 to 10 great folks who are experienced in the ecosystem, in the innovation space, and they just have the opportunity to chat with one another about somebody's product, about somebody's perspective, that's really what helps inform who ultimately gets into the MassChallenge programs around the world. And so I think of this process as being pretty significant. It takes it's a huge undertaking. Hundreds of people are involved in it. It's a real it's really getting the entire ecosystem sort of primed and ready, so that ultimately those startups that get invited in are, have like this menu of people who are already lined up. They know something about them. They're excited about them coming in. And that's a pretty it's a pretty ambitious sort of undertaking, and it's different than, frankly, any process I've heard of for other accelerators. I think that there's a real opportunity here, like I said, to get voices from around the world that are supporting the entrepreneurs and to get these differentiated. So you're not just going to meet with investors, you're not just going to meet with stakeholders, you're not just going to meet with customers, but you get those perspectives from sort of around the table, if you will.
What are the key characteristics that you would say separate out those who make it beyond that top quartile, who get selected for the cohort, and those who aren't able to?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that one should know is what was exciting for me to see were the companies that didn't make it in year one, but made it in year two. So there is really an evolution and a growth. And I think for those companies that are open to learning, that's a huge skill. And I think that that's a huge characteristic that's important for founders in general. Like the founders that are, on the one hand, passionate and excited and know their stuff, but are also sort of humble enough to be open to learnings. That doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean take everybody's advice. That's not sort of be waffling through the space, but still open to at least hear and to learn. I think there's a real important growth mindset there that really can make a founder. So I think the founders that tend to get into the program are, number one, those who are, they've gotten past the very early idea stage. They've really taken this to the next level. That doesn't mean they necessarily have a product or that they're in the market, of course, but they've done a lot more than just sort of your cursory research about a specific industry or about a specific problem. They've fallen in love with the problem. They haven't yet. They have sort of a sense of the solution, but they're not done. There's still a space there to learn, to adjust, to grow. And I think that there's a maturity or sophistication of the founder, again, to be open to learning, to recognize where they can be supported by mentors, and to be really thoughtful about what it is that they need to do next. Founders can be overwhelmed by the options and by the opportunities that are in front of them. And in some respects, it's almost a challenge of riches, right? You have so many opportunities and things coming at you. How can you possibly say no to something? But the founders that sort of have reached the point where they recognize the next steps they need to take, and they can sort of balance between where they want to be opportunistic and where they really need to be thoughtful and mindful about their next steps, those tend to be the ones that are more likely to make it to the next steps, and the ones who are more likely to use their time in our accelerator or any type of program to use that time well, because it is such a finite time.
It seems that there's a mindset that you speak to, which I think is critical for those that are listening. In order to get through this accelerator, it sounds like there's like you said, a lot of opinions and not a lot of money. And so when you have a lot of opinions, not a lot of money, you have to really want to grow. And I think there's a distinction that gets naturally made there between people that are looking for quote unquote success, and as they define it as, getting investors and then sort of growing it, versus the people that are really looking for truth. Does the product work? Is it valuable? Is there a market for it? And I wonder if what you're providing really is a check for the greatest founders, right? Because the best we had the opportunity to interview the founder of Waze, and the entire conversation was only about the problem. Like he almost was like, it was like almost like irrelevant. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't irrelevant to his investors, the price that he got for their
Right.
company. But it really wasn't the focus. It really was this obsession with problems and the desire to solve them. And what we're finding is the people that are passionate about problems and solving them want opinions like you said, that they don't just roll over, but they're happy to engage in conflict.
Yeah.
And I wonder if when you see that, do you know that these founders really are going to have a great career in founding companies?
I think that's so you hit on the point so well, because it became almost a joke that when I would I would try to ask hard questions of the founders, especially those that weren't, that we hadn't yet made a decision where we were going, and we'd say things like, well, what do you want out of this, right? In 4 months, what's going to be a success? And invariably the ones who told me, well, I want X amount of dollars committed or term sheets for this type of investment round, whether they got in or not was sort of, it didn't make that sort of difference, but you knew ahead of time that these were folks who were going to be focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Not because investments aren't critical. We recognize they are, that the money matters. We exist in a world where those are critical, but the money goes to places that have real teams, that have taking on serious problems, that are going to be able to create a meaningful, sustainable solution. The money is the tool; it's not the end goal. And so I think that you're exactly right, that those who are hyper focused on what they need to fundraise because time is of the essence, are probably less well positioned to take advantage of things like incubators and accelerators, where there's sort of this finite period of time where like all the doors are open to you because people just want to help and support and help you grow, and the money is a piece of that. It is not the whole. So I think that's absolutely right, and you definitely do see that when I talk about sort of the maturation or the sophistication of the founder. That's a huge part of it.
It almost feels to me that when you have founders that are going into the startup world to be rich, you almost know that it's not going to work. Like, it almost feels like there are so many better ways or easier ways for people that want money to make it. Founding companies is not the way. You have to be, like you said, and I think it's important for people to hear it, that you have to be passionate about something besides the finances. The finances is the gas, but it's not your car. It doesn't.
Exactly.
It just gets you to where you have to go. But without the initial passion of where you're going, you're not going to have that intangible to make it work.
Right. And I think that the piece of that also is to be passionate about solving a problem rather than passionate about the technology you've developed, because I think that's another sort of, if you will, kryptonite that people fall into, right? I have this really cool technology. It can do something amazing. I can apply it in a myriad of ways, but you haven't solved anybody's problem yet. Who cares about that? Who's going to pay money for that? Who is going to wake up and change all of their systems for that, because you make their lives so much better?
Right. And they'll usually say, usually after that comment, they go, well, Steve Jobs created a market. And you're like, relax. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. Look, lightning does strike. Let's not.
Right.
But yes, knowing your market and really spending the time. And I think for me, when I'd be sitting at MC and we'd be meeting all these entrepreneurs, and I think, so what are you going to get out of this time? I can't guarantee you that you'll raise capital. I can guarantee you that we will create a platform so that you can ask a lot of questions of the people who should have answers, right? You can get to potential customers and ask them questions, not signing documents that they're going to start buying your product, but you can ask them meaningful questions to really get into the mind of that person for whom you are solving a problem. We're going to make sure that you have access to the mentors that can help you navigate this world that you haven't been in yet. We can make sure that you're going to be ready to be on any stage at any time and talk the talk, be prepared to meet with those folks, and be prepared to identify who the types of folks that you need to be engaged with, that you need to be working with, are, and will help you build your team. Like, we'll help you understand who else needs to be around your table. And I think that's, the entrepreneurs who are ready for that step, accelerators can be a really, really important game changer, because it gives you this like blitz of time where you can focus 100% on this business. You can really use every hour, every day, every connection to grow and to really lever that up. I think the other piece of this, and it's no less important, is you become part of this band of founders. I know you guys have talked to so many founders and spent so much time with them, but there is something magical. I don't have any other word for it. There's something magical that happens when founders meet one another. It's like this group psychology / complaint session / like, I don't know, lightning bolts and sparklers going off, because there is so much passion and exhaustion and fear and excitement and all of that happening amongst these people, that when you can create the conditions for founders to meet one another, to ask each other real questions, to really listen to the answers, to find, like, it's not even friends, it's like siblings, it's closer than that. And I think that the founders that really spend the time with their other cohort members are so much richer for it, because they end up helping one another. They end up being that sounding board that when you're terrified because that client didn't come through and you have to make payroll in a few days and you don't know where that's coming from. Those are real fears and those are real things. And you don't necessarily have an obvious person to talk to about that, who understands that, who wakes up with that same sort of prickly feeling and not being sure sort of where they go, even though they're so passionate about this problem and they're certain that they're going to be able to do it. And I think that that's something that's, again, a unique and important component of these accelerators and incubator opportunities.
Okay, no, it's great. Charlie hit on the first of 4 things that had occurred to me as Yonit was talking about it. The echo from opening season 3 with Uri Levine, the co-founder of Waze, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Yonit just took us very deeply into that. Another one is the need for founding to not be a solo act. Founder is oftentimes, unfortunately, the loneliest role in the universe almost. You might have a board above you, you have the employees below you, but who do you go to? You were talking about the sibling side, about being able to find the compatriots, the chevra, that are going to be able to support each other, give each other insights and other things like that. Another one of them was the need as a founder to learn despite your passion. That was where Yonit was talking about it at the beginning, about that balance, being able to strike that as being a critical thing that they're looking for. They're assessing that they're admitting people based on having it and not admitting them if they sense that they're faltering when it comes to the passion driving too much. And related to that, but to extend it a little bit, you were talking about essentially learning how to say no as a key thing that founders have to learn, but how to say no to yourself as being a key element that we've also delved into a little bit, looking for disconfirming evidence, looking for the assumptions you're making that you're actually wrong, not the natural human inclination to confirm. And so just to highlight those pieces of it as we get into, we're going to get into hopefully with the next of the episodes that we're going to be continuing with Yonit. Now we were talking about the selection into MassChallenge. We'll get into the development at MassChallenge also. To make a great startup, it takes both of those, being able to select and develop. So that's where we're going to go next, Charlie.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Always, you can feel free to send us questions at foundersalumnuspodcast@gmail.com. Stick with us for part 2 of this episode.